scholars that there's an indication anybody who says a story of the Baal Shem Tov merits financial blessing. One of the great sages said that there are three things that are not necessarily so. Three lavdavkas. One, it doesn't have to be a story of the Baal Shem Tov, but any tzaddik. Another one, it doesn't merit financial blessing, but many other blessings. That's number two. And number three, it doesn't have to be on Saturday night, but any other night of the week, anytime you tell a story of a tzaddik. To be able to share stories of the Rebbe is an unbelievably powerful experience. And this evening, I'm going to ask you, Alex, to start, you, Rabbi Kalabach, to start, and you, Tzemach, to take over afterwards. And please, God, through the storytelling of stories of the Rebbe, this evening, may we merit great things, and the greatest thing of all, the revelation of Mashiach. May he come speedily. Will there be no more sickness, no more suffering, no more war, godliness revealed in this world. Alex, over to you. Alex? Tzemach, you better start.
All right. So, my wife and I, the other night, we watched a video at home called Resistance. And it's the story of the very world-famous mime, Marcel Marceau. And the story is that he was actually involved. He came from a Jewish religious family, and he was actually involved in helping German Jewish kids who were orphaned through the Nazis. He was helping Jewish orphaned kids who were orphaned through the Nazis to get into France, where they set up orphanages. And then when the Nazis invaded France, he moved all these orphanages with others down to southern France. And the conditions were terrible. I mean, these were kids who were very traumatized, and then a whole lot of French kids that came on board. They were very traumatized by, some of them had seen their parents beaten to death in the streets of Berlin, totally taken out of their environment. One of the things that Marcel Marceau did is he did a lot of cheering them up. And the film starts with a very interesting picture of him standing with General Patton in 1945 in one of the Nazi stadiums where they used to do their displays. By now, Patton and the Americans and the British and the Allies had conquered Europe back from the Germans. And Patton tells his men, he was a great leader of men, that the important thing that every soldier needs to know is that fear comes with a territory. You're going to have fear. It's a question of how long you can keep your nerve in that fear. And then he introduced his troops to Marcel Marceau and said, here is a man who maintained his courage for a number of years. And he's now going to tell you, and he gave him a mime display to all the troops. And in this film, it shows how these kids were absolutely disorientated, terrified. Marcel Marceau used to entertain them quite a bit. But one of the kids in those orphanages is a man called Rebbe Newman, who in 2013 gave an interview to Gem, which is the stories of the Rebbe. And he told a story of when he was in one of those orphanages. And he talks about a man called, they didn't know his name. He used to visit them in southern France. They were terrified. And he would come quite regularly and spend a long time with these kids. He would tell them, he knew every child by name. He would bring baguettes and sardines sometimes, and tuna and food, because they were seriously hungry. And he would he would talk to them, he would hear what was worrying them, and these kids were seriously traumatized. He would comfort them, And he was an incredibly reassuring force in their lives. But all they knew about him is that his name was Monsieur, which means Mr. in French. Marcel Marchot rescued a lot of these kids and smuggled them out, and I don't know whether it was through him that this Reb David Neyman was smuggled out or not, but he ended up, after the war, living in Williamsburg with his uncle. He had an uncle, I think his parents, they were orphaned, and he lived in Williamsburg, and his uncle suggested to him that he go and visit the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And so in 1957, he made a trip to the Rebbe and was privileged to get a Yechidus with the Rebbe. And as he goes into Yechidus, the Rebbe looks at him, he lights up, lichtig, and he says, Davido, Davido, das ist Davido. And he looks, and there, lo and behold, before he could recognize Monsieur, the Rebbe, had recognized him. And that's the story.
Beautiful story. Can't get through.
Alex, over to you.
Cannot start my video. But anyway, okay. A good Tag. Thank you for the beautiful introduction, Rabbi Masinta. Tzemach, thank you for the amazing story. I'd like to, before I share the actual story, Rabbi Groner Vashom, the secretary of the Rebbe, says that after Yechidus, the head of the Mizrahi came to see him and told him that he asked the Rebbe in Yechidus, what is the best way to infuse his people, all the people that they see, with Yiras Shamayim? Limud HaTorah is one thing. Learning Torah is certainly an important step. But how do you infuse someone with Yiras Shamayim? And the Rebbe answered by telling stories of tzaddikim. Because when you tell stories of tzaddikim, it gives people an inspiration and an added hisofa to know, said the Rebbe, that there is something more to the physical world. And there's something more that you don't truly understand. So I'd like to first, before I tell my actual story, I'd like to first illustrate what I feel has recently come up in our own family to understand a little bit of what a Rebbe is all about. And it's a cute story. I was with my children and grandchildren on Pesach, and I walked downstairs in the morning, and my oldest grandson of 5 years old, Kasriel, is playing with his 3-year-old brother, Levi. They're playing on the couch, and he turns to me and he says, Zaidi, we are now on a pirate ship. And I want to tell you, Levi is the boss. I am the main boss. That's what he told me. I said, Kasriel, you just summed up the whole thing of marriage. But later I was thinking that that's life as well. Even for frum Jews, even for people who believe in God, what is our classification? Who to us is the boss and who is the main boss? There are some people, sadly enough, for whom God doesn't exist at all. So in their lives, they feel they're altogether the boss. There are some people, thank God, they understand that there is a Torah, and so they look at themselves, unfortunately, as the main boss, and God is the boss because they have a Torah, and whenever it suits them, they follow it. And when it doesn't, well, then they do what they want. Then there are some that are the opposite. And that is, they are the boss, but thank God the Almighty is the main boss. And therefore, whatever they want to do, if it goes along with Torah, great. If it doesn't, then the main boss counts. But for a tzaddik, the Rebbe, and this is how the Torah describes Moshe Rabbeinu's qualities. Moshe was the humblest person of all people who ever lived, because to him, there was no such thing as a boss and a main boss. He was totally nullified. He didn't exist besides being an emissary of God Almighty. And that's what you saw with the Rebbe, that he was totally nullified before godliness. And you saw it by the respect he was able to give to every human being. Each and every person is born B'Tselem Elokim, in the image of God. It makes no difference his age. It makes no difference who the person is. You saw the utmost respect, the utmost attentiveness. You know, I recently read a story that a little child was standing in a driveway, you know, up the stairs of 770 when the Rebbe came in, and the child was crying. And the Rebbe asked him, "What's wrong?" And this child said, "My Melamed, my teacher, just slapped me." And the Rebbe, you know, pacified him a bit, went into the office. And then I understand he phoned up the head of that yeshiva, and he said, "What, this Melamed, he's slapping his children. Why do you have him as a teacher?" And the answer was, "Well, that's the only job he can get. And I have pity and sympathy on his family. What other job? That's his livelihood." And the Rebbe said, "Well, then let him be a sheikh. Let him be a slaughterer. That's no reason to put him as a teacher of children." But you see the sensitivity, and you see the inclusivity of the Rebbe. You know, when you look at the Rebbe's campaigns, the Rebbe's concern for everybody. He started, first of all, with, if you want to call it, with the shluchim, with the Chabad, with not even Chabad houses, yes, just carrying on from his father-in-law and sending out emissaries throughout America and Canada at first to include everybody. He had the idea of Merkeshlichus, which is he took rabbinical students and sent them out for a few weeks in the summer to places where there was no Judaism yet. Then he had the idea of mitzvah tefillin to put on, to get everybody included in Judaism. And he never would call it Kiruv Rechokim, God forbid, which some people call it bringing the distant close, because to him, there was no such thing as someone who was distant. Every Jew had a potential. Every Jew was a part and parcel of it. They may have been uneducated. They may have been at the moment at present not totally involved, but he included everybody with his campaigns. Then he included the prisoners with that Aleph Institute he started. He included the elderly with the Tiferes Levi Yitzchak. He included the little children with the Tzivas Hashem, with the army of God. He included the women with the Neshei Chabad, which was revolutionary in its time. The Yiddish Haim that they instituted. And finally, in the 80s, he also included every person in the world with Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, the 7 laws of B'nai Noach, to include everybody. And he fought, and he said, this is what will bring the world to morality. If we see the chaos that's going on in the world today, and this was in his time, how much more so when you have it today with defunding the police and all the morality that's going on in the world. He said the answer is to bring silent prayer into the schools to teach that there's a higher being. The Rebbe was totally, as I say, there was no such thing even as a boss or a main boss. It was totally everything. He was just a vehicle for godliness. But I'd like to share a story that I hear from Rabbi Groner. And this story happened not long ago, after 94. And you know, the Zohar says, and Tanya brings it down, that a great tzaddik, even when he leaves the world, he is actually found more in this world than in the next world. Because he is not limited to any physical. And his whole life, that it was totally spiritual. Physical meant very little to him. He had very little time to eat. He hardly ate whatever they served him. He left over most on his plate. I'm told he didn't even eat chicken or meat during the week, only Shabbos. He hardly slept. He was spending all his time, all his free time with that which he loved, studying Torah. All the rest of his time involved with people and helping them. So the story that Rabbi Groner tells is that not long ago, a chassid comes to a beautiful wedding. It was magnificent. And there he sees an old man sitting at the table, clapping, and with a glow on his face. And he goes over to this old chassid, and he says, I see that you are glowing to such an extent. Are you connected to this, to the wedding? How are you connected? He said, I am the Zayda of this chassid. He says, that's amazing. But shouldn't you be the first one to dance? Why are you sitting off the table? Why aren't you dancing? He says, let me tell you my story, and through that you'll understand why I'm not personally dancing. He says, I am so proud of my grandson. And approximately 2 weeks or so before the wedding, my grandson phoned me up, and he said, Zayda, I am so happy that you're here. I'm so happy that you're going to join our wedding. I would love to give you a bracha under the chuppah. He says, wonderful. He says, that's just one thing. Being that you're from Russia, you have never had a bris. And without a bris, you can't have a bracha. So if you could do me a personal favor, please, would you go through the bris? And the Zayda said, for you, with pleasure. So he says, you see, he tells the guy in front of him, I just had a bris, and therefore I can't dance. The person hearing this story was so overwhelmed that he said, he was in tears. He said, I'd like to give you something. And he opens up his wallet and he takes out $1 and he says, I want you to know that I received this dollar from the Rebbe, but thank God I received many others. Because you went through the self-sacrificing of having a bris, I would like you to have this $1. The Zayda's face turned white. He broke down in tears. He says, I cannot believe this. I can't believe this. Thank you so much. At first, the chassid thought, wow, look how he appreciates the dollar. But then the Zayda says, now let me tell you the story. He says it was a Sunday morning, and I was told that the Lubavitcher Rebbe hands out dollars on Sunday, and I should go there for a blessing. And my turn came, and I put out my hand. The Rebbe put his hand out and gave me the dollar. But before I could take it properly, he pulled back, and he looked at me, and he said, tell me, did you have a bris? And I said, no. Being from Russia, I didn't have one. So the Rebbe said, do me a favor. When you have a bris, I will then give you $1. He says, now look at this. 94 came, and I thought, that's it. You come over to me 2 weeks ago, 2 weeks after my bris. You might think this was just a coincidence. This was just, why should you at this wedding come over to me and ask me these type of questions? He says, you might think that it was just coincidence. But the Rambam says, Ein mikra nikra, there are no such things as coincidences. The Baal Shem Tov teaches us that divine providence means we are all affected. The Rebbe was working through you. He put into your mind to see me, to ask me this question. He put into my mind for me to answer that question in that way. And then he put into your mind to hand me to be the shliach of the Rebbe. So many years later, as the Rebbe promised me, he will give me $1 after I have my bris. And you were the messenger to fulfill the Rebbe shlichus. I have a few minutes left. I'd like to tell you my personal story. We had just opened Chabad of Lyndhurst. This was we opened it in '84, so I was there for the summer of '84. And at that time, you were able to give the Rebbe at a Shabbos Farbrengen a bottle of whiskey if you were making an event. And you would come up to the Rebbe, he'd pour from the bottle into his kos, then pour it into your kos. You would say l'chaim, and he would tell you to give it out to the people who were present on Shabbos, and then give it out at your event. Now, I wanted a bottle of the Rebbe, I wanted a bracha for our new shul, but I had no event. This was Chabad of Lyndhurst. But I knew that Sukkot, we were planning to have a Sukkot dinner. Now, this is in the summer there, so it's June, July. Well, okay. But on Shabbos, like there were 5, 6 people who put up a bottle, and you stood in the middle. You came up to the Rebbe during the singing. So there were a few people in front of me, and I noticed that none of them announced their event. So I said, oh, thank God, I'm lucky. This way, how could I announce in June a Sukkot party? But my muzzle, as I came up to the Rebbe, he says, no, you're having an event, announce it. So I had to announce it to everybody in June that Sukkot, you're all invited to our Sukkot party. Now, comes Sukkot. We're having the Sukkot dinner in Chabad of Lyndhurst, 1985. And all of a sudden, during the dinner, it started to rain, to pluck with rain. Jill Kahan was there. And she says, because I had told the story of the Rebbe with a bottle of whiskey or vodka, whatever it was. So she says, you have a bottle from the Rebbe. bring it out to the sukkah and let's see. We bring it out to the sukkah, and suddenly, please believe me, if anyone knows Jill Kahan, you can verify it with her. It stopped raining. We finished the course, and they cleared the tables. For some reason, they cleared that bottle as well. They brought it into the building. It started to rain again. As they brought it out, it stopped raining. This happened a couple of times where we literally saw with our own eyes how bringing that bottle helped the event be more successful, where people could dry, and when the bottle went in, it was raining. And by the way, that wasn't the only time I saw a similar story. It was the year of Chinuch, 1976. The Rebbe announced a Lag BaOmer parade. I remember it was during the week, never before and never after was there a Lag BaOmer parade where the Rebbe came out during the week. And we went around with the buses to all the Wednesday hours to bring the kids. They had worked through the night on floats. And gegossen, the skies opened up that Lag BaOmer. All 5 boroughs of New York were ploching with rain. I remember on the school bus, we had umbrellas, and the parents of the kids who were picking up said, "Are you crazy? How can you have a parade in this weather?" We said, "Don't worry. The Rebbe said we'll have it." These kids were sent with boots and raincoats. It was ploching. Eastern Parkway, the whole place was closed. I'll never forget. As the Rebbe came out, the clouds dispersed. The sun began shining. And for the duration of that parade, the sun was shining. I heard the news that night. They were talking about the weather. And they said on TV news, and that was real news in those days, not fake news yet. They said all 4 boroughs were full of rain for some unexplainable reason. Brooklyn had sunshine. My friends, the Rebbe promised us Mashiach. Right now, we are in darkness. Let us do what we can to make the sun shine. Because when Mashiach comes, there will be no more darkness. There will be a transformation of Alma de Shikra, of this false world, of this chaotic world. And once again, we will be able to serve God. We'll be able to attend shuls. We'll be able to do everything that we have to do. Do one more mitzvah to really bring it and to help fulfill the Rebbe's dream when we'll be together once again. A good vach.
Rabbi Kolobach and Tzemach, thank you so much. And for all those who are participating, thank you for joining. Every Saturday night, we're going to be, every Motzei Shabbos, every Saturday night, we're going to be exploring different, the Rebbeim, the different Rebbes of Chabad, stories of the Rebbeim, the history of Chabad, and particular stories of the Rebbe. And please God, in merit of this, and in merit of bringing stories of tzaddikim to the world, may we have the ultimate bracha, as Alex said, the revelation of Mashiach. Will be no more darkness, no more suffering, no more war, no more sickness. Have a good vach, a great week to everybody. Tomorrow evening, we have Rabbi Benzi Sudak from England, who'll be sharing some very fascinating things with us. Good vach.